Before I begin, it might be of assistance to print out a copy of the transcript of this talk that we'll make available on our website as a booklet to help you follow the presentation. The first part of this talk is titled Finding the Redeeming Understanding of the Human Condition. It's the hard part of the human race. The problem is that we still have to apply the understanding to free ourselves from the human condition. As I summarised in my introductory video and booklet, the interview, and I fully explained in my definitive book, Freedom, humanity's heroic journey of painstakingly accumulating knowledge has finally led to the finding of the redeeming understanding of our psychologically upset, soul-corrupted human condition, thus ending all the conflict and suffering in human life at its source, and providing the now urgently needed path forward to the complete rehabilitation and transformation of our lives and world. So what I'm going to be presenting is the actual roadmap that every human and the human race as a whole is now able to follow for our species' psychological rehabilitation. And I think everyone would agree that psychological rehabilitation is precisely what the human race now urgently needs. So yes, as I summarised in the interview, our whole human journey of conscious thought and inquiry has finally led to the discoveries by science of the difference in the way genes and nerves process information. That genes can orientate a species, but the nerve-based, fully conscious mind that we humans have needs to understand the world to operate. With the resulting conflict between our instincts and intellect unavoidably causing our psychologically upset, soul-corrupted human condition. And this ability to know why we fully conscious humans were seemingly so stupid as to corrupt our original, loving, instinctive self or soul is the redeeming insight we have needed to relieve this core insecurity about our corrupted condition that we have carried since we became fully conscious species some 2 million years ago. The great burden of guilt we humans have suffered from destroying the magic world of our soul has at last been lifted because we have found the key understanding that ends that underlying pain in our brains and allows the human race to become psychologically secure, happy and sane again. Indeed, when the ancient Greeks had inscribed on their temple the words, "Man, know thyself," they were beseeching us to make sense of it, and by so doing, bring an end to all the chaos, suffering and seeming madness in human life. Certainly, humanity's made great progress in understanding the universe around us, but the all-important problem of the human condition remained an unsolved mystery, to the extent that one of history's greatest scientists, Isaac Newton, lamented that I can calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people. Well, through the efforts of all the humans who ever lived, which eventually enabled science to discover how genes and nerves work, that whole jigsaw of confusion and mystery about us humans has now been fitted together so that all the hardship and suffering and madness we humans have been enduring for so long does finally make sense. Christ said, "The truth will set you free," and now at last the ultimate truth of the explanation of our fundamental universe has set us free. And the human race is finally on its way back to home to peace, togetherness and happiness. The light of transforming understanding now comes streaming into Plato's dark cave where he said we had to hide from the fear of exposure to our corrupted condition, which has been a horrible existence of blind confusion and devastation. I'll refer to Plato's cave again shortly. So yes, this liberating light of understanding is going to be so incredibly relieving. The human race will feel like it's waking up from a nightmare. So that's the overall effect finding the holy grail, the redeeming, reconciling and rehabilitating understanding of our species' 2 million years corrupted condition. We finally have the means to achieve the rehabilitated wholeness for humans that what was this? Psychoanalyst Carl Jung was forever telling us. What did he say? Depends on the ability to own our own shadow. Because we can now own the shadow of our species' corrupted conditions. And so the human race is finally in a position to become whole. Now, the words psychosis literally means soul illness, and psychiatry literally means soul healing, derived as they are from psyche meaning soul, and osis meaning abnormal state or condition, and Eritrea meaning healing. But we've never been able to heal ourselves, in effect explain to our original instinctive self or soul that we, our fully conscious thinking self, is good and not bad, and by so doing reconcile and heal our split selves until now, which is why Professor Harry Process, former president of the Canadian Psychiatric Association, said about the psychological effect of this understanding that, what do you say, I have no doubt that this biological instinct versus intellect explanation of the human condition is the holy grail of insight we have sought for the psychological rehabilitation of the human race. Yeah, and the more we digest this relieving understanding of our fundamental goodness, the more healing relief comes to every aspect of our psychologically upset human condition. So yes, we have finally achieved humanity's dreamed of goal of finding the redeeming understanding of our now immensely psychologically upset, soul-corrupted, fallen human condition. To use the lyrics of the song The Man, The Impossible Dream from the musical The Man of La Mancha to illustrate this. These words are amazing. Throughout humanity's glorious quest to solve the human condition, we have been born the unbearable sorrow of our corrupted state, and run where the brave dare not go, and marched into the hell for the heavenly cause of achieving the seemingly impossible dream of righting the unrightable wrong of the condemnation we have been living with for being corrupted, and finally, with our last ounce of courage, vanquish that seemingly unbeatable foe of our ignorant instincts and reach the seemingly unreachable star of the redeeming, dignifying, liberating and healing understanding of our corrupted condition. It truly is an almost beyond imagining fabulous achievement for us humans to have lived through and overcome the psychological hell that we have had to endure for some 2 million years. Means we have to be the bravest, most courageous and heroic species that ever lived on Earth. Now, there is an issue, and this is very important. Our species' great struggle is not yet over, because we still have to use or apply the redeeming understanding fast enough to save the human race from the imminent threat of our species' extinction on terminal levels of psychological upset. As I will explain, the way we do this, and this applies both individually and collectively, is through the transformed way of living. But before I get into that part of this presentation, the first problem that has to be understood and overcome is the deficit, which I'll now explain. Part 2, the problem of the deaf effect. As I've described in my video booklet, The Great Guilt, and in other publications, the only way humans have been able to cope with the unbearably depressing truth of our corrupted conditions, while we couldn't explain it, was to deny its existence. As I mentioned, the great Greek philosopher Plato used the perfect analogy in this situation, where he described us as humans as having to hide deep underground in a dark cave where no light could get in and expose our corrupted conditions. Well, Plato not only described how we have had to hide in this dark cave-like state of denial of our corrupt condition, he even predicted what would happen when one day someone puts together a redeeming understanding of that corrupt condition that liberates the human, all the cave prisoners of his analogy from having to hide in their dark cave. So way back during the golden age of Greece in 360 BC, when writing in his dialogue The Republic about the time when someone escapes from the cave into the light of day and sees for the first time the real world and returns to the cave to help the cave prisoners escape into the sun-filled setting outside the cave, which symbolises the transition to the real world. Plato wrote that when the cave prisoner is forcibly dragged up the steep and rocky ascent, this is his actual word, out of the cave and not let go till he had been dragged out into the sunlight, in other words, shown the truthful, real, redeeming explanation of that corrupted, imperfect human condition. And he actually used the term human condition. The process would be a painful one to which he, the cave prisoner, would much object. And when he emerged into the light, his eyes would be so overwhelmed by the brightness of it that he wouldn't be able to see a single one of the things he was now told were real. Significantly, Plato then added, certainly not at first, because he would need to grow accustomed to the light before he could see things in the world outside the cave. So that's amazing. Plato has said, what he said here is that when we humans are presented with the redeeming explanation of our corrupted conditions, we would be so attached to living in denial of it that we wouldn't be able to see a single one of the things we were now told were real. And it makes absolute sense that we humans have been living in such deep fear of the issue of our corrupted conditions that our first response is to not allow our minds to take in or hear what is being talked about. We suffer from a mental block, what we in the WTM have come to describe as the deaf effect. And I should emphasise that what an amazing insight Plato had. No wonder, A.N. Whitehead, one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century, described the history of philosophy as merely being a series of footnotes to Plato. That's an amazing story. Plato truly was a very great, denial-free, honest, effective thinker, or what humanity has termed as a prophet. So yes, the problem of the deaf effect is very, very real. So it's certainly likely that at first you, the listener, won't be able to, as Plato said, take in or hear a single one of the things you're now told are real. Now, I know that saying that will seem like an impossibility. You'll think, look, if this explanation is rational, I'll be able to understand. But the problem of the deaf effect is actually true. I mean, you can read many real-life accounts of the deaf effect and the great guilt in other publications. So everyone needs to be warned that they will very likely experience this extraordinary problem of the deaf in listening to the description and explanation of the human condition. So now, the great difficulty that this problem of the deaf effect creates is how can it be overcome? So how do we solve this problem of the deaf effect? Having lived in great fear of the issue of our corrupted condition, how can people overcome that fear enough to be able to look at, take in and absorb the explanation of our corrupted condition? And by so doing, discover that the all-relieving understanding that the corrupted condition has finally been found. How do they, if they can't hear it, how do they learn the benefits of being able to understand it? Well, now, the solution to this problem of the deaf effect, the way people overcome it, is through being prepared to reread and or re-listen to what's being written or said. This process of rereading and re-listening to what is in fact a straightforward and clear presentation of growing accustomed to the latest plan described erodes our historic denial and counters the definite, allowing the compassionate and immensely relieving insight to become accessible. So, the overall solution to the problem of the death effect, which has been such a big problem and has been stopping this all-relieving and all-solving explanation of the human condition getting out to the world, is to patiently wait for a critical mass of people to appear who have managed to grow accustomed to the light enough to overcome the death effect, either through their own perseverance or having a real lack of resistance to the symptoms of the human condition. And for the relief and excitement of these people, to then inspire the rest of humanity to persevere reading and listening to the explanation of the human condition enough so they can also overcome the death effect and discover the immensely relieving and human race-saving understanding of our corrupted human condition. Part 3. The problem of the threat of our species' extinction from terminal levels of psychosis. Okay. Once the death effect can begin to be overcome, the problem then is, and like the death effect, this is also a very serious problem, can the human race benefit from the relieving understanding quickly enough to avoid the fast approaching threat of extinction of our species from terminal levels of psychosis? So, now, the situation is that while the human race has finally managed to achieve the seeming impossible dream of reaching the seemingly unreachable star and finding the redeeming understanding of our corrupt condition, it's now psychologically so exhausted, there's a very real possibility it won't be able to benefit from the 2 million year heroically fought for breakthrough understanding before it's outrun and dies from terminal psychosis. As I explained in the interview, the history behind this unthinkable, horrific situation where the human race is now so psychologically exhausted that it faces the threat of extinction from terminal levels of psychosis, which this graph summarizes, is that we humans have been becoming increasingly psychologically upset since we first became a fully conscious species and challenged our instincts in the management of our lives some 2 million years ago, with extreme upset developing in the last 10,000 years or so when, with the development of agriculture, made it possible for large numbers of people to live close together in settlements, which greatly increased the occurrence and spread of upset. As the historian Manning Clark said, the bush, that is the wilderness, is our source of innocence. The town is where the devil prowls around. Now, this rapid increase of upset is what has led to the terminal levels of psychosis in emerging generations in the world today. This situation, the psychological exhaustion of younger generations, is in fact very dire. They are so psychologically crippled and unable to cope with anything that they've been referred to as the snowflake generations. They've even described themselves as the burnout generation. In aspect 1 of my 2023 booklet, Our Meaning, I present an endless series of articles reporting on how the psychologically exhaustion everywhere now in the human race, but especially in younger generations. I mean, where it's so great that society is breaking down everywhere we look, and we're entering endgame. That is for our species, a state of terminal psychosis. It's a very, very frightening and serious situation. So the following is a compilation of quotes from those articles, and if you look at my book, Our Meaning, you can find the sources of these quotes. These reports speak of an epidemic of autism and exploding rates of bipolar disorder and ADHD and spiralling numbers of children with development delays, and a tidal wave of mental health issues in the schools as anxiety from across the world. So these are reports from across the world that tell of how many of the younger generation are now finding it almost impossible to face the world, let alone work to earn a living. For instance, in Australia, it's reported that there is a silent legion of kids across our nation suffering from this psychological paralysis, where, as the organisation School Refusal Australia explained in a submission to Victoria's Royal Commission into Mental Health, the kids are isolated, often live in their bedrooms 24/7 and are unable to leave their home. They barely function. They feel guilty and ashamed. They've given up. This is not simply wagging, i.e. skipping school, as earlier generations knew it. It's an extreme phobia. And further reports about the psychological paralysis of the young in Australia state that 1 in 5 teenagers struggle to read. Teenagers. And that the paralysis is so great, we've now got a population that doesn't want to work, and that there are thousands of businesses that just can't find staff, let alone good employees. Yeah, the chair of Australian National Broadcasters, Ita Buttrose, complained that millennials so lack resilience they need hugging. In China, it's reported that many of the young are now only able to do the minimum and feel they cannot find a way out of their predicament of not wanting to participate in the world. In France, a study claims that the country is now mired in a laziness epidemic. This unwillingness to work at all has led to a huge shortage of labour. And in Japan, there is now an epidemic of shut-ins, the phenomenon of withdrawal from society. A report about Spain said that many young Spaniards have dropped out of education and work altogether, with no plans to resume study or to look for a job. And in the United States, it is reported that among millennials there is an epidemic of narcissism, personality disorder, where people try to boost low self-esteem, and that their self-centeredness could bring about the end of civilization. A survey in the US also found that a staggering 79% of business owners and managers find Generation Z the most difficult generation to have in the workplace, citing entitlement, a lack of effort, motivation and productivity. Some saying that interacting with them can be exhausting because they lack discipline and are too easily offended. So yes, the burnout generation is absolutely the right description of what's happening to the human race. In the case of politics, I need to first explain the basic situation that's involved in the political dialectic, which is that having had to deny the unbearably depressing truth about 2 million year corrupted condition while we couldn't explain it, has meant that there's been no corrupted condition to have to be explained. So you're living in denial of it, so there's nothing to explain. So there's been no admission of our fundamental task and responsibility of having to participate in humanity's heroic battle to find a redeeming explanation of our corrupted condition. If there's no corrupted condition, then there's no corrupted condition that has to be explained. However, now that we can explain and defend our corrupted condition, we can finally admit the existence of it and therefore of humanity's great heroic meaning and purpose of having defined understanding of it, which, as I explained in my booklet, Death by Dogma, is a battle that the right wing in politics has supported with its emphasis on freedom of expression and on the upsetting competitive, selfish and aggressive individualism needed to find the ultimate explanation. So admit our corrupted condition, and we finally have the reason for the right wing in politics. John Kenneth Galbraith, the liberal economist and advisor to the Kennedys, once mockingly said that the right wing are engaged in one of man's oldest, best financed, most applauded, and on the whole least successful exercise of moral philosophy. That is the search for a truly superior moral justification for selfishness. Yeah, well, with the explanation and resulting ability to admit superior moral justification for selfishness that the right have been supporting is now revealed, along with the extreme danger of the left's freedom of expression and selfishness denying, dogmatic, deluded, pseudo-idealistic demands for a self-loving world. So while there's no corrupted condition to have to be explained, and there's no ability to effectively explain and justify the selfishness and competitiveness of the right wing, the attraction of the left's incredibly dangerous, pseudo-idealistic, let's all just hug each other, do good to make yourself look good and feel good, politically correct, woke culture has become irresistible, especially for those who are extremely psychologically exhausted from the effects of humanity's heroic battle to find understanding, namely today's younger generation. After the 2022 federal election in Australia, the Australian National University 2022 Australian election study found that only 1 in 4 voters under the age of 40 voted for the right-wing coalition, and only 1 in 5 voters among the Generation Z voted for the coalition. In fact, there's many predictions being made in democratic countries that before long the right may never be able to win power again. A May 2019 article in The Atlantic with the title "Young Democrats May Control the Political Future" says that the right-wing GOP seems to be playing a losing hand, that it seemingly won't ever get back into power. I mean, the takeover by pseudo-idealism and with it the destruction of humanity is apparently everywhere upon us. So thank goodness that what has actually been right about the right wing and what has actually been wrong about the left wing has finally been revealed. Better still, thank goodness the understanding that makes this exposure possible brings to an end the whole upsetting battle to find this all exposing us, all relieving understanding. So, as I emphasised at the end of the interview and in Death by Dogma, the real way to bring about a cooperative, self-loving world was to end the upsetting struggle to find the redeeming understanding of the corrupted human condition. Because, as I'll talk more about shortly in part 4 of this presentation, that redeeming understanding is what ends the need for the individualistic, competitive, selfish, and aggressive world that the human race has had no choice but to carry on living in. Finding, understanding the human condition was the real and only way to end our upsetting search for the understanding that saves the human race from extinction. Now, I should mention that while my booklet, Death by Dogma, focuses on the extreme danger of the pseudo-idealism of the left, in my booklet, Our Meaning, focus on how being able to admit our corrupted condition finally allows us to admit our species' great meaning and purpose of having to find the redeeming explanation of that corrupted condition, and how being able to now know our meaning brings immense relief to so many aspects of our life. To continue on with quotes from those articles about the extent of our psychologically exhausted conditions. In the case of education, there are reports that half of undergraduate students now think it's accepted silent speech they feel it's upsetting. But how can you learn and seek truth and meaning, which has been the whole purpose of education, if you aren't prepared, expected to, or even challenged to think anything? As one report said, the safe space trigger warning culture with intolerance and dissent in Western universities, the puritanical hectoring of social media gives grounds for concern that the flowering freedom of thought in the past several centuries may be under threat. It may mean that the entire world is heading to a greater dark age. So yes, humans are giving up thinking, which is the basic responsibility of being a conscious being. So truly, the breakdown of human civilization is happening everywhere. And to look at what's happening in our communities, this is a drawing I have done to illustrate the end play, desperately sad state of dystopia, lawlessness, unbearable psychosis, homelessness, and drug addiction that's now tragically characteristic of the streets of large cities in the US. And what is happening there is what's going to be happening in the rest of the civilizations elsewhere. So there really isn't any meaning or hope left out there in Plato's human condition denying cave world, which is why my booklet, Our Meaning, that reveals the meaning of our suffering, is especially needed and precious. These photographs on the left and right are of people participating in post-apocalyptic zombie street parades that have become popular among the young in recent times. And the painting in the middle by Michael Biscay was sold at auction in 2013 for a whopping $48.8 million. A price, no doubt, that's sort of achieved in part because of how much it resonates as an image of our time. So while we've had to live in denial of our corrupt condition while we couldn't explain it, that condition has become so extreme that it's become necessary to gain at least some psychological relief from it by temporarily giving it expression, sort of exorcism through being honest about it, at least for a little while in these street parades. These are lyrics from the young American heavy metal band With Life in Mind that reveal just how traumatised our now immensely upset, soul-corrupted world is for young minds. And therefore, how important it is going to be for them to now be able to make sense of that world through understanding the condition. It scares me to death to think what I have become. I feel so lost in this world. Our innocence is lost. I scream to the sky, but my words get lost along the way. I can't express all the hate that's led me here, and all the filth that swallows us whole. I don't want to be part of all this insanity, famine, death, pestilence, and war. A world shrouded in darkness, fear is driven into our mind everywhere we look. Trying so hard for life with such little purpose, lost in oblivion. Everything you've been told has been a lie, the human condition is avoiding life. We've all been asleep since the beginning of time. Why are we so scared to use our minds? Keep pretending, soon enough things will crumble to the ground. If they could only see the truth, they would coil in disgust. How do we save ourselves from this misery? So desperate for the answers. We're straining on the last bit of hope we have left. No one hears our cries. No one sees us screaming. This is the end. A 2017 report by medical doctors published by the US National Library of Medicine titled We Are the Hollow Men, the worldwide epidemic of mental illness, summarises this whole horror, psychologically exhausted situation the human race is right. But the report begins by quoting from T.S. Eliot's poem The Hollow Man. Remember us, if at all, not as lost, violent souls, but only as the hollow men, as such stuffed men. This is the way the world ends, not with a bag of women. And the report then says, all across the world, patients are coming to their local accident and emergency department catching reception. They are in pain. Sometimes their eyes scream out their suffering, and other times they appear as cold, empty shells reflecting the hollowness the patient feels inside. Unlike patients with compound fractures or lacerations, patients with psychiatric illnesses have wounds that are rarely visible to the naked eye. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang but with a whip. This system is stretched to the breaking point with no end in sight. So yes, it certainly does appear that there's no end in sight to the descent into terminal psychosis out there. That this is the end, is the heavy metal band end of his quote. This is the end. So we have had to live in denial of our psychologically upset soul-corrupted form and human condition while we couldn't explain it. Now that we can explain it, we can and now must face the truth that psychological upset has reached excruciating, paralysing, terminal levels. And what the truth of this psychologically tortured, truly horrific predicament means is that even if there were innumerable counsellors highly trained and skilled in using the redeeming and healing understanding of the human condition that we now have, and even if every person was in therapy all day long, it would still take a number of generations for all the psychological upset in humans to be healed and psychological upset in humans to be eliminated from Earth. And for every child to be able to grow up in a completely unconditionally loving environment and so not suffer from any psychological upset during their upbringing. To illustrate the point, it's obviously going to take a number of generations for the healing effects of the understanding we now have of the human condition, for men to not be, to some degree, egocentric, and for women to no longer need the reinforcement of being sexually attractive. I mean, indeed, it'll take a number of generations for sex as humans have been practicing under the duress of the human condition for it to no longer occur. I think it's in chapter 811b of Freedom, I explain the relationship that has existed between men and women under the duress of the human condition, and also how, while under that duress, sex has been used as a way of violating, destroying, ruining, or fucking innocence, or its implied criticism of our lack of innocence. So, the reality is that it will take a number of generations to psychologically rehabilitate the human race. Which brings us back to the problem of how is the human race supposed to cope with this extreme psychological upset in the meantime? How can the catastrophe of the imminent death of our species from terminal psychosis be avoided? Part 4. The transformed way of living. The answer to this problem of how we are to avoid extinction from terminal psychosis is the transformed way of living, which I'll now explain. While our species' psychological rehabilitation will take a number of generations, what is so spectacularly wonderful is that having the redeeming understanding of our fundamental goodness immediately obsoletes our old artificial ways of defending ourselves against the implication that our corrupted condition meant that we are bad and unworthy. Remember in the interview that I explained using the Adam Stork analogy, how when we were unjustly criticised by our instincts for defying them and managing our life from a basis of understanding, that the only ways we could defend ourselves against our instincts criticism was to prove that we weren't bad by competitively winning as much power, fame, fortune and glory as we could, and by angrily attacking the implication that we were bad, and by blocking out from our minds that implied condemnation. Well, now that we've found the real defence for our corrupted condition, of the actual understanding of why we are good and not bad, those old artificial, egocentric, and angry and alienated ways of defending ourselves are necessarily obsolete. Those old defences have done their job and are no longer needed. Indeed, now that we have the real defence for our corrupted condition of the instinct versus intellect and biological explanation for why we corrupt, and therefore why we are actually good and not bad, it would be completely irresponsible, given the plight of the world, to continue using the now obsolete and thus now unnecessarily destructive, old, artificial, angry, egocentric and alienated ways of defending ourselves. defence for our corrupt condition found. Everyone can and now must, if we are to save the human race, abandon our old artificial ways of maintaining our sense of self-worth and instead direct all our abilities and energies to supporting the redeeming understanding of the human condition that we now have and to adopting the cooperative, selfless and loving new way of living that it has made possible. Indeed, that it has revealed. We have no reason not to take it. We let go of our old, now obsoleted, selfish preoccupation with winning power, fame and fortune and glory as a way to sustain our sense of self-worth, and instead focus our mind on living for and through the fabulous, cooperative, selfless and loving new potential that has opened up for the human race now that understanding of our human condition has been found and our instinct and intellect are reconciled. Everyone now can and has to change, be transformed from being servants of our egos to being servants of humanity. I mean, we had to defensively defy our instincts to find understanding, ultimately find self-understanding, understanding of why we corrupted our instinctive side. So our egocentric defensive system was necessary, but now it no longer is. Now, gloriously, what happens when we give up our old egocentric and angry and alienated ways of living and take up the new transform way, where we live in support of the understanding of the human condition, is we discover a freedom we have only ever dared to dream of, where we are no longer preoccupied justifying ourselves and proving our worth every minute of the day, as we actually have that every minute of the day. And as a result, are finally able to access all the true beauty of our lives, of those around us, and of every living thing. I mean, the shackles of responsibility we have had of having to continue supporting and participating in humanity is immensely necessary and immensely heroic, but at the same time, immensely upsetting, soul-corrupting search for the redeeming understanding of why we defied our instincts fall away, and a whole new world that is effectively free of the agony of the human condition opens up to us. Even though we are not yet free of the psychologically upset state of our personal corrupted condition, we are effectively free of it. Our lives are effectively transformed because it's no longer the focus of our minds. That's the seemingly magic, immediate benefit of having the redeeming, biological understanding of the human condition. Everyone, we all, baby boomers, next generations, Y, millennials, Z generations, and alpha generations, are suddenly free to live our lives in support of a non-competitive, non-selfish, non-aggressive, and non-human condition corrupted, denying, peaceful, truthful, human race-saving, cooperative, selfless and loving way of living that is effectively free of the agony of the human condition. So this is how we are quickly able to bring the human race back from the brink of extinction to terminal levels of psychosis. Now, it should be very clear from the brief explanations of politics that I gave earlier in part 3 that this is not the horrifically deluded human race destroying false start to a transformed and loving world that the politically correct woke movements are trying to dogmatically impose, but the human condition redeemed and reconciled, understanding-based, real transformation of the human race. However, this distinction is so important, it needs to be emphasized, which is what I've just done. In my book, Death by Dogma, especially in paragraphs 85 to 86, I describe just how dishonest and extremely dangerous is this fake it to make it false start to a transformed world that the PC woke movement is dogmatically trying to impose. I should also emphasise that while this great transformation of the human race that understanding of the human condition makes possible is similar to a religious transformation in that it involves completely letting go of, transcending born again from, our real upset self, and instead deferring to another way of living, that's where the similarity ends. As I explained in chapter 9.5 of Freedom, while religions were an incredibly effective means of containing the upset of humans while the search for understanding of that upset continued, the transformed way of living is in complete contrast, concerned with what happens after that liberating understanding is found, and there's no longer any need for the old must prove our worth, competitive, selfish and aggressive way of living. So while religions were the human condition believing, they were not human condition resolving, like the understanding that we now have we're able to live in support of it. In fact, the transformed way of living, or transformed life or state, as we in the WTM also refer to it, represents the realisation of religion's hope and faith that the liberating understanding of the human condition would one day be found. I mean, it's the time Moses has looked forward to when he anticipated that we would be like God, knowing, with God being humanity's personification of integrative meaning, which I explained in chapter 4 of Freedom, in Freedom Essays 23. And it's the time Christ has instructed us to pray for in his Lord's Prayer, when he said, your, namely God's integrated peace and kingdom come, your will, that we be integrated, in other words, be done on earth as it is in heaven. And it's the time predicted in Revelations in the Bible, when it says that another book will be opened, which is the book of life, which is the human condition, explaining the humanity liberating book. And a new heaven and a new earth will appear. For the first heaven and the first earth will have passed away. In other words, and the dignifying full truth about our corrupt condition. As he says, it will wipe every tear from our eyes. There will be no more death or mourning, or crying or pain, i.e. no more insecurity, suffering or sickness. And he goes on. For the old order of things has passed away, as they surely have. And it's the time the great Hebrew prophet Isaiah hoped for when he says humans will beat their swords into plowshares. Nations will not train for war anymore. And it's also the time when Buddha said that in the future they will everyone be Buddhas. In other words, be free of psychosis. And will reach perfect enlightenment. In other words, reach understanding of the human condition. So yes, unlike religion, the transformed way of living represents the end of dogma and faith and belief and the beginning of knowing. Essentially, religions were based on deferring to and living through support of the embodiment of the ideals in the form of the soundness and truth of the denial-free thinking and behaving prophet around whom the religion was founded, whereas the transformed way of living is based on deferring to and living through support of first principle-based biological understanding of the ideals and of our species' unavoidable historic lack of compliance with those ideals. Another immense difference between the transformed state and religion is that in the transformed state there's no deity involved there or deference to a personality. In fact, there's no worship of any kind. And best of all, unlike religion, there's no involvement or emphasis on guilt, because guilt and the whole notion of good have been eliminated forever and through the reconciling understanding of the human condition we now have. As I explained in detail in chapter 9 of Freedom, the logic behind making this human race-saving decision to transform our lives by living in support of our anger, egocentricity and alienation, obsoleted, understanding-based, cooperative, selfless and loving existence is irrefutable. Now that great goal of the whole human journey of conscious thought and inquiry is achieved, and we have found the redeeming understanding of our corrupted condition, all our old retaliatory, defensive and insecure behaviours, egocentricity, aggravation that we've had to employ to psychologically prop ourselves up while we couldn't defend ourselves and understand it no longer needed. In fact, as I pointed out earlier, with this redeeming understanding of the human condition, it would be an act of total irresponsibility, indeed madness, to continue down that old, insecure, defensive, and now destructive road. The truth is, there is nothing in the way now of every human taking up the magnificent, unburdened, human condition-free, transformed life. And as a result, the human race will bounce back from the edge of this dark abyss of the threat of extinction to emerge in the sun-drenched uplands of a whole new, immensely exciting and immensely relieving potential. So yes, this totally responsible and desperately needed transformation of the human race, where everyone lives in support of a cooperative, selfless and loving existence, is the way the human race is able to quickly turn around the dire situation it is in and avoid imminent self-destruction from terminal levels of psychosis. We're rational creatures, and so when all the logic says there's only one response we can make, namely the transformed way of living, then that's the only response, the only course of action the human race can, will, and must take. I mean, the reason we develop science, and the word science is derived from the Latin scientia, meaning knowledge, is because we are self-adjusting, knowledge-thinking beings who depend on understanding to manage our lives. And most importantly, and relievingly, what this knowledge-based self-adjusting capability means is that the great transformation of the human race is not a way of living that has to be dogmatically imposed. There's no authoritarian dictatorship involved, and nor is there any need for any form of forceful social insurrection to make it happen, to make it take place. All that's required is to spread this logic, fully understandable, science-based, biologically fully accountable, and true, incontestable, absolutely justified and needed breakthrough understanding of the human condition, and it will do all the changing on its own. It is a completely peaceful revolution. We live in support of this understanding, and it will look after us and the world. That's the mantra of the new world for the human race. So yes, it is the logic that now says that everyone can and therefore must lead the obsoleted, wretched with horrible suffering and dreadful conflict, agonisingly, psychologically upset, angry, egocentric and alienated state, to one where we are all living in peace, togetherness and happiness. And so exciting and body-draining with relief is this life, where we are effectively free of the agony of the human condition, that before long, when news of this holy grail of breakthroughs and its ability to transform the human race gets out into the world, there will be a stampede of people who have joined the human condition resolved sunshine multitude on the sunshine highway to the world in sunshine. As the great denial-free thinking prophet or scientist, philosopher T.L. Desjardins wrote, the truth has to only appear once for it to be impossible for anything ever to prevent it from spreading universally and setting everything ablaze. As I summarise in paragraph 1166 of Freedom, the excitement and relief of being effectively free of the human condition, the joy and happiness of being liberated from the burden of our insecurities, self-preoccupations and devious strategizing, the awesome meaning and power of finally being genuinely aligned with the truth and actually participating in the magic true world, the wonderful empathy and equality of goodness and fellowship and understanding of the human condition now allows us to feel for our fellow humans, now to effectively focus on repairing the world, and above all, the radiant aliveness from the optimism that comes with knowing our species' march through hell has finally ended, and that the human condition, free new world is coming, can now transform every human and thus the world. Hence, we're the World Transformation Government here. As I said, in every main publication I've ever written, going right back to my first book, Free, in 1988, soon, from one end of the horizon to the other, will appear an army in its millions to do battle with human suffering and its weapon understanding. So, the transformed way of living is the way the human race is able to change quickly enough to avoid the imminent threat of self-destruction from terminal levels of psychosis. Part 5. Sir James Darling's astonishing vision fulfilled. My headmaster, when I was a student at Geelong Grammar School in Victoria, Sir James Darling, actually focused on the crucial need for this fundamental change from living selfishly to living selflessly in one of his many extraordinary speeches. Before referring to that speech, I should point out that Sir James was described in his 1995 full-page obituary in the Australian newspaper as a prophet in the true biblical sense. And he's widely recognised as Australia's greatest ever educator. Indeed, he was knighted for services to education and broadcasting. Also, he created at Geelong Grammar School a school of such renown that King Charles III was sent halfway around the world to attend for part of his education. So this is what Sir James said in his amazing 1950 Geelong Grammar School Speech Day address. Selfishness is, as it has ever been, the ultimate destructive force for a society, and there are only two cures for selfishness: the regimented state that we all profess to dislike, and the change of heart, which we refuse to make. That is the choice, believe me, for each one of us. We have not much time in which to make the need for decisions. In other words, to have a change of heart and live selflessly is serious and urgent, and the sands of time are running out. As my explanation of the human condition finally makes understandable, the selfishness aspect necessary during humanity's heroic search for understanding of its corrupted condition. However, it's still, as James said, the ultimate destructive force in a society. And yes, the pseudo-idealistic dogma of the left in politics, the regimented state that as James talked about, is dislikable. And yes, as we can now understand, we have had to refuse to make the change of heart to living selflessly, while we still had to persevere with our corrupting search for understanding of our divisive, corrupt, fallen human condition. But now that we have found that understanding, we can have that cure for selfishness of the change of heart to living selflessly. That's as James emphasised, and that's 73 years ago now, back in 1950. Was serious and urgent even back then, because he said the sands of time are running out. So, absolutely astonishingly as it is, James' vision at Geelong Grammar School, and I really want to point this out, was actually to preserve the innocent souls of the boys attending his school, in the hope that one of them might remain sound enough to achieve humanity's seemingly impossible dream of finding the redeeming understanding of our corrupted human condition that makes Sir James's change of heart to living selflessly possible, which is what I've done. In large measure, due to his unique Platonic, soul-preserving rather than intellect-emphasising approach to education. You can read an essay I I've written about Sir James' absolutely astonishing, world-saving, Plato-inspired vision of producing a man who would solve the human condition at www.humancondition.com/Darwin. But the following are some extracts from his various speeches that I refer to in that link that reveal his outrageously optimistic, clear-sighted and courageous vision. Honestly, what I'm going to read now must be amongst the most impressive words ever spoken in human history. I should mention you can find the source of these quotes in that essay. So these extracts. Only in the light of a discovered purpose can we lead Australia into an attitude of mind which is prepared for the sacrifice of service. In seeking for such purpose, it will be necessary to seek below the surface for the thoughts which do lie too deep for tears. In other words, which are those thoughts that for most people are so depressing and confronting they can't go near them, namely the thoughts about our corrupted human condition. Only so can we come to a better understanding of life and to answer even the all-important question, what is man that thou art mindful of him? In other words, why are humans' behaviour so often less than ideal? And the Son of Man that thou visitest him. When Christ's behaviour by contrast was sound and ideal, James has clearly stated that the all-important question that we have to answer is the issue of our species less than ideal, human conditions. For to exclude that question from the study of evolution is surely as futile as to talk theology and to forget evolution. He's saying here a biologist is going to be needed. There must be a complete answer. There must be coherence and sense in the universe. Disintegration and our existence fragmented into a rubbish heap of shreds and patches with coherence, significance and growth impossible. Our compass bearings lost and civilization foundering. Canon Raven says the future lies not with the predatory, in other words the selfish, and the immune, in other words the alienated, but with the sensitive, that is the innocent, who live dangerously, in other words, defy the fragile, insecure world of denial. It should be the prime object of education to develop this sensitivity. The truly sensitive mind is both susceptible and penetrating. It is open to new ideas and it seeks truth at the bottom of the well. It is the development of this sort of mind which should be the object of education process to cultivate. Each of us should regard our lives as pledged to the one paramount purpose of saving the world. The sands of time are running out. And while referring to the kind of man needed to save Australia and humanity, Sir James spoke of cultivating men of conscience, men not afraid of facing unpleasant, in other words, truthful facts. It requires more toughness to resist the world of denial, than to join in. It is the awakening and vivifying of the conscience, that is our innocent soul, of those who belong to it, which ought to be the chief purpose of a church school, because conscience is the executive part of consciousness. The quality which above all other needs to be cultivated in education is sensitivity. One provides that he must be sensitive and tough. To solve the human condition and save humanity requires sufficient sensitivity, innocence, soundness, soul to access the truth, but also sufficient toughness to stand up to and defy and ultimately overthrow the all-pervading false and deluded world of denial. He must combine tenderness and awareness with fortitude, perseverance and courage. Sensitivity is necessary because without it, there is no life of the mind, no growing consciousness, no living conscience. Can such men be? Of course they can, and they are the leaders whom others will follow. In the world of books, there are for me Anton St. Exupéry and Sir Lawrence Vanderbilt. Now, Sir Lawrence is the most quoted author in all my writings, and incidentally was who King Charles III chose to be godfather to his son, Prince William. I go on. The time is past for help which is only a band-aid. It is time for radical thinking and for solution on the grand scale. We are not now the strength which in old moved heaven and earth, but something o'er the end, some work of noble note may yet be done. Truly astonishing and wonderful was St. James' bold vision and clarity of thought. Like Plato, St. James truly was a very great, denial-free, honest, effective thinker or prophet, as his obituary recognised. I should mention that St. James's focus on cultivating the souls of boys to create the kind of man necessary to save humanity. The reason why Geelong Grammar School remained a boys' school during St. James' tenure is because, as what I've just said about evidence, he knew that it was men's responsibility to solve the human condition. I provide the biological explanation of why it was men's responsibility in paragraph 770 of Freedom. In fact, that whole chapter 811b about the relationship between men and women is relevant description of men's role in the world. So, recklessly unappreciative of St. James' vision, Geelong Grammar School became co-educational immediately after St. James' tenure. So St. James's extraordinary, bold and truthful world only just lasted long enough to cultivate the sensitivity in a man needed for the work of noble note to be done, of the radical thinking for a solution on the grand scale, namely to seek the truth at the bottom of the well, and answer the all-important question of why man, unlike the son of man, is corrupted. Before the dishonest, pseudo-idealistic, too good to make yourself feel or look good, politically correct woke culture killed his vision. As it says in the Bible, was there ever a prophet your fathers did not persecute for their truthful clarity? I mean, if boys at Geelong Grammar School didn't have a critical, important and enormously difficult job to be prepared for, then co-education would have been ideal. But while that focus existed, it was false idealism to make it co-education. I mean, that's just the truth. As I point out in paragraphs 770 to 773 of Freedom, human society hasn't been patriarchal for no reason. And far from males being toxic and society being pale, male and stale, as woke advocates of co-education have said, men have had to be, and now with the human condition solved, have proven to be the heroes in the story of life on Earth. I mean, as one of Australia's distinguished journalists, Janet Albrechtsen wrote and titled her article that defended Sydney's prestigious Cranbrook School remaining a boys-only school. The only thing toxic about boys' schools is the woke parents. Significantly, my brother Simon, who has been my lifelong supporter and basically actually started WTM, and my fellow patron of WTM and great friend Tim McCartney-Snape, is a world-leading mountaineer who is a twice-honoured Order of Australia recipient, both attended Geelong Grammar School, as did my and Simon's father and Tim's father. Significantly, also Tim's great-great-grandfather, Dean McCartney, was one of the founding fathers of Geelong Grammar. So essentially, it's now up to the WTM to carry on Sir James' vision of saving the world, which, with the education of young people, we will do by creating schools that teach the redeeming, reconciling and rehabilitating understanding of the human condition. And since men have completed their job of answering the all-important question of why man, unlike the Son of Man, is corrupted, which is the issue of the human condition, these schools will all be co-educational. So, yes, the understanding of the human condition and the transformed way of living it brings about achieves Sir James's great change of heart from living selfishly to living selflessly that is needed to save the world. Part 6. Therapizing our psychosis. What now needs to be explained is what will complement and help that transformation, and in the long term, remove psychosis in the human race that is no longer any need to transcend it with a transformed way of living. And that is the actual therapy of our psychosis that the redeeming understanding of our corrupted condition now makes possible, which the transition between the two images by William Blake illustrates. While this therapizing of our upset psychosis is the point where it no longer exists in the human race, will, as I've emphasised, take a number of generations. The therapizing actually begins from the moment we overcome the defect and can access the redeeming understanding of our corrupted human conditions. As Professor Prosen wrote, what Griffith is presenting is understanding of the source of insecurity that the whole human race suffers from for having destroyed our species' innocent soul. It is a universal self-blame that his understanding at last provides healing insight into. All human behaviour is saturated with that universal insecure, depressing state and resulting anger, egocentricity and alienation that has developed from it. But we finally have the compassionate foundation insight needed to dismantle all that upsets psychosis. So the real psychotherapy of the collective and individual psychosis can begin. So yes, and it's such an immense relief for our minds to finally be able to make sense of all the suffering and seeming madness in human life, and of all that has happened in our own lives. That the minds of most people soak up the information. They absolutely guzzle us when they get through the defect and can hear it. As I've described in my book, The Shock of Change, there's a great deal of stunned adjustment that our mind goes through when we first realise this information really does explain the human condition. But even when we're going through this shocking stage, where, for example, was it Ian Frazier, the author of that best-selling book, The Great Blame, said he was staggered into silence by what he was reading. The rapid soaking up of the information and its ameliorating effects typically still occurs. If you look at the daily ecstatic responses slider under the interview at the top of our humancondition.com homepage, you will see endless comments by people who are finding immense healing relief from finally being able to understand the world of themselves, such as the more I am watching and reading, the more understanding I'm gaining, and love this, learning more and more, and understanding the human condition makes me feel free and happy. My attitude has changed. I'm not upset with myself anymore. I'm free of guilt and full of love. So wonderful to understand yourself and the whole world. Ever so grateful. It all finally makes sense. Going to rebuild a new me. Once you get your head around it, it's light bulb time. And I always knew that one day understanding of ourselves would save us from ourselves. Of course, everyone, according to how much hurt to their soul that they experience growing up in the extremely psychologically upset world we are living in, will variously feel shocked, confronted and exposed to having our species' corrupted conditions in their own corrupted condition revealed. This initial response being the cause of the death effect. As they point out in Freedom in chapter 9.3, the arrival of understanding the human condition represents exposure day, truth day, or honesty day, or transparency day, or revelation day. In fact, it's a long-feared so-called judgment day, referred to in religious texts, although this judgment day is actually a day of compassion and understanding, not a day of condemnation. As an anonymous Turkish poet once recognised, Judgment Day, he said, is not the day of judgment, the day of understanding. So, while everyone will initially variously feel shocked, confronted and exposed by the revelation of the worlds and of their own corrupted state, since the revelation is one of compassion, this pain from the shock and exposure and the initial resistance and even anger it can cause towards the information will pass, and relief will be the final effect. As Brian and Carlton attested in the interview I mentioned earlier, the end process, the revelation, if you like, is easy and reassuring and calming and self-acceptance. Getting there is the difficult bit. So yes, as the saying goes, the truth hurts, but since it's the compassionate whole truth that's being revealed, in time the hurt is replaced by immense relief and happiness. In chapter 9.7 of Freedom, I present a detailed description of how everyone, including the more upset, can progress from feeling unbearably exposed by the explanation of the human condition to feeling immense relief from it. This natural healing of our upset, that listening to and reading about this redeeming understanding of our corrupted condition produces can obviously also be supplemented and sped up by actively therapizing our psychosis with the help and guidance and counselling. Now that humanity's corrupted condition has finally been explained and defended, and the human race no longer has to live in denial of our corrupted state to cope with it, and the human race can now come out of the closet, as it were, about it in its now immensely corrupted condition. Therapizing and healing our 2 million year upset, soul-corrupted psychosis will be big business. It will be what many, many people will want to do. And to help with this demand, more and more counsellors will appear who are trained and skilled in using this redeeming understanding of the human condition to therapize psychosis. In my book, Therapy for the Human Condition, it's designed to initiate the development of this great new frontier that has opened up the psychological rehabilitation of the human race. Part 7. To save the world, the priority has to be the transformed way of living, not therapy. What now needs to be emphasised is that while many people will want to actively therapise their psychosis, the priority always has to be to take up the transformed way of living, because that alone is what can quickly bring the human race back from the brink of extinction from terminal levels of psychosis. Therapizing upset is a process that takes time. In fact, as I've explained, to fully achieve it will take generations. And the reality is that, especially initially while this human race-saving new world is getting underway, not a lot of therapy of our upset will be possible. So, at best, it can initially only complement our adoption of the transformed way of living. And it has to be remembered that everyone should not only want to take up the transformed way of living because it saves the human race, but also because, as I've described, it's the most incredibly relieving, exciting and satisfying state to be living in. I should also mention, and I talk about this at length in my therapy book, the human race has become so psychologically exhausted that even though the redeeming understanding of our corrupted condition needed to actually rehabilitate the human race hasn't been available until now, the need for psychological therapy has become so desperate that all manner of superficial attempts have and are being made to try to therapize psychological upset. This development of at least some superficial therapy has in fact become so needed and so popular that it is one of the fastest growing industries in the world, with the Global Wellness Institute reporting in 2019 wellness is now at $4.2 trillion market that is growing nearly twice as fast as the global economy. So obviously this superficial therapy is immensely popular. Now, if it's immensely popular, then how popular the real therapy that's available now is going to be, because it's going to be incredibly popular. But again, everyone needs to prioritise adopting the transformed state, because it'll free us from practicing in the now necessary psychologically upsetting, soul-destroying, older generations exhausting, younger generations crippling, competitive, selfish, and aggressive way of living. And by so doing, hauls the whole human race back from the brink of terminal psychosis and extinction. So of course, with the real therapy of our psychological upset lives now possible, there's going to be an immense hunger for this therapy. Why stay living with horrible, debilitating and deadening psychosis when you have the means to at least begin healing it? And it does make sense to heal our psychosis sufficiently for us to become at least to some degree functional. But I stress again, focusing on therapizing our upset can become a selfish preoccupation when the priority is to take up the transformed way of living. So everyone has to temper their desire to therapize their personal psychosis with the human race's need for everyone to selflessly adopt the transformed state of way of living. I drew this picture to warn against exploiting the insights we have gained to give yourself an edge and make yourself even more successful in the old power and glory ego castle building world, rather than focusing on supporting the new world. But this pocketing the wind, as we the WTM call it, also applies to the danger of focusing on rehabilitating your psychosis while avoiding taking up the transformed way of living. So while therapy is going to be a huge business, because everyone will want to and need to heal their psychosis to at least some degree, the infinitely bigger business has to be, if the world is to be saved, to take up the transformed way of living. And it will be once it catches on, because it's so absolutely, incredibly relieving and exciting to be effectively free of the torturous and dead human condition-stricken existence. So no more focus on supercars or better umbrellas or ways to win football games, just on how to get free of the hell on earth of the human condition, because now at last we can. Part 8. The two parts to the transformation of the human race. So there are two parts to the transformation of the human race: the transformed way of living and the therapy for our corrupted conditions. Now, for more on the transformed way of living, we suggest you now watch WTM founding member Tony Gowing, who is the St. Paul of the transformed way of living, the most wonderful teacher and promoter of it, present his account of the transformed way of living. Following Tony's presentation, we suggest you watch the inspiring video of the Acratitas family from WTM Melbourne, describing how being able to understand the human condition has brought incredible relief and therapy to their lives, as it can for everyone's life. And following my, Tony's and the Acratitas videos, which are all on our transformation page at humancondition.com/transformation, you will see there further wonderful examples of and instructions about those two parts of humanity's transformation. Also, the transcript of my, Tony's and the Epictetus' videos are all presented in the Great Transformation booklet, which is freely available on our website, or you can purchase from bookshops like Amazon.
Ami no